So soloing for me is not this statement that I can climb this route perfectly. It's more of a statement that I know I might not climb it perfectly, but I do know that I have enough excess strength and stamina to be able to carry myself safely to the top, even if one or several things go wrong.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, brought to you by 180 TAC. Get out there and have some fun.
So there's this new backpacking food company called Peak Refuel, and honestly, I gave them a shot for my last backpacking trip. Y'all, it was literally the best backpacking food I've ever had in my life. I was so impressed by them that I wanted to reach out and get a deal for our listeners. So if you keep listening to the episode, I'll tell you how to save 20% off an order with them. But until then, here's the episode. So if you're keeping up with the outdoor world, you know that free soloing is at least gaining in attention, if not popularity right now, because of the movie Free Solo, starring Alex Honnold, where he literally free solos the nose of El Cap in Yosemite Valley. Austin is also a free soloist, and he's the guest of the show today. And I wanted just to interview a free soloist to know what it's like, why they do what they do. And if you don't know what it is, it's basically people who rock climb, with no rope, no safety harness, no equipment whatsoever, to where a fall, once you get, not very far off the ground, once you fall, it's certain death. And he's the first free soloist I've ever interviewed. It was interesting to hear the amount of preparation and planning that goes into it, and also the comparison to other seemingly dangerous things like base jumping. And Austin would argue that free soloing is a lot safer when done correctly. But I want to be clear that we do not condone this activity. If you're the type of person that likes to try new things, absolutely do not try this. It is something that, as you'll see and as you'll hear, Austin is very experienced. He's very calculated, as well as extremely prepared. So we encourage you, do not do this. And I hope you gain some insight into the mind of a free soloist. All right, welcome to the show. Today I have Austin Howell. He's a climber, but something unique about Austin that if you look his name, it's one of the first things you see. He is known for climbing in a hat, but even more so, he's known for doing some climbs completely naked, which is free natural solo. So Austin, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Where are you coming from today?
So I'm in my office in Bolingbrook, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago out on the far west side.
Oh man, what's the climbing culture like there?
It is actually amazing.
Really?
So before I moved up here, I had actually visited Chicago for work. There was a period where I was like 75 to 100% travel. And I went to 26 states in the space of 18 months and met climbers everywhere I went. I kind of collect climbers on Facebook like Pokemon. And now it's turned into this sort of semi-automatic serendipity generator where I actually found a friend who I put out the All Points Bulletin saying, does anybody have a spare corner where I can throw a bivy sack while I adjust myself up there? And a friend of mine said, no, but I got a spare room. And the nearest climbing is either north to Devil's Lake, which the season tends to close a little bit early on account of the fact that it's, I'm from Texas, and per my geography, that's more than halfway to Canada.
Right.
And on the other hand, if you drive south, 5.5 hours per Google Maps, so like 6 hours of actual driving, will take you to southern Illinois, which is very much regionally significant. But at 7 hours of actual driving, you can hit the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, which is internationally significant. People fly there from Europe and Japan. And so I joke that the fortunate thing about Chicago is that the Red River Gorge is our weekend crag. But the unfortunate thing about Chicago is that the Red River Gorge is our weekend crag, and it's 7 hours away. But it's remarkable. Every weekend when I'm driving down and back, I always see these cars covered in stickers, and you'll see Black Diamond, Patagonia, and it's just everybody's committed in making that trek every single weekend. It really is something else. As far as this place is away from climbing and as flat as it is, there's a very vibrant culture of climbers here.
Wow, man, that's I know climbing's growing in popularity all over the country, but I'm from the South as well. And dude, I just did not realize, like I saw your Facebook, there's like places in Alabama, Georgia, and like, I don't know, it just wasn't around me when I was growing up in Florida. But I realized like it is growing so rapidly in so many places that you just would never expect. I had no idea there was a climbing culture in Chicago.
Yeah, I know. It's a really remarkable thing. When people think climbing, they usually think big mountains and such like, but really all you need to go rock climbing is a cliff.
Right.
And you can have a cliff anywhere that there's running water, because that water going through, it'll carve out little bluffs and what have you. And next thing you know, you've got 100-foot wall that's good and proper to have fun on.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but that's a great point. Wherever there's water, there's bound to be a cliff of some point.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've had good talks with like whitewater kayakers and stuff like that going through like Missouri and Arkansas, and those are actually areas that are the locals are out there developing crags every single weekend. Those are one of the frontiers of undeveloped terrain in America. That's just every corner you look around, there's something that no one's ever climbed before.
Yeah, I think the first big climber I met in college, he was from Arkansas, and he was local to climbing there, and he introduced me. So yeah, I guess you're right. Wow, I'm out here in Denver, and it's just huge. There's so many big walls, and I used to live in Yosemite. Kind of guess I just didn't realize you don't need a 3,100-foot granite monolith to have a climbing culture.
Yeah, you don't, and it's a very different vibe between like here in Colorado, because here you've got people working 9 to 5, making that 7-hour haul. It doesn't fit the culture you think of with climbing. But up, in Denver, you've got what I jokingly call the Colorado Alpine Start. Uh-huh. Wake up at 9, show up the crag about 10, start climbing at 11, then 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You're like, wow, I got stuff to go home and do. And I'll see you here tomorrow morning. Yeah, okay, cool.
That's great. That's awesome, man. So what, you said you're from Texas, and you've been climbing for about 12 years?
That's correct.
All right. So how did you get into it? Who introduced you to it?
Yeah, I didn't have anyone introduce me to it per se, as I kind of stumbled into it. Through high school, I was a swimmer, and whenever I got into college, they didn't have a swim team for men. So we were trying to figure out what to do to keep occupied, and a friend of mine said, hey, you were good with those little trailer pop-up rock walls at the county fair. Well, they got a rock wall at the rec center. Why don't we go do that? And we went over there, and we just knew in our hearts that climbing was about how fast you can go.
Right,
we were one of those kids. And
it's swimming, but just, vertical.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. And so, one of my friends did it in like 5 minutes. Another one did it in like 3 minutes. And then I did it in about 45 seconds. Then one of the girls working the rock wall said, no, you come here. And at the college university, the staff, part of their duties are to belay patrons, belay students on the wall to make it more accessible to everybody. And so she tied me into a rope and explained what a climbing route was. You're only allowed to use the red holds. And then she put me on this route. And one of the cool things about the University of Houston Rockwall, shout out to the UHOA down there, is that it has a lot of natural texture to it. So it's a Nycros art wall. They call it artificial rock technology. And the setting style they use there is they try to force you to use the tiny little footholds on that wall. And so about 15 feet up, I just got completely flummoxed. I could not figure out how to move, and my arms gave out on me, and I fell off a route that was about 5'8", which, to put that in perspective, would be the upper beginner category of our annual climbing competition at the university. And that was my glorious start to rock climbing. No natural talent, just getting completely flummoxed. And the thing that really stood out to me was, oh my God, I fell off because I got confused. This isn't just dumb movement. It's a problem that needs to be solved. And I've got that engineering mindset, so that's just intolerable. And I came back the next day to try and figure it out, and then the next day to figure the next one out, and on and on and on and on. And it just never stopped. There's always something new and exciting around the corner.
And so that has led you to it being a huge part of your life now.
Oh, yeah. I'd say the real turning point was I was pretty good at guitar and I was pretty good at rock climbing. And I got to a point where I realized that getting better at one of those would require sacrificing the other, because it's just, it's a time commitment. Mm-hmm. And there's only so many hours in the day. And what I realized was with guitar, I only appreciated the end result of being good. But with climbing, I enjoyed the work that it takes to get better. So the whole process, when you're in there in the gym, grinding it out, and you're on a fingerboard trying to strengthen your hands, all that was just fascinating to me. And the endless puzzle of it. Whereas, when you're playing guitar and you're sitting there grinding out scales and stuff like that, trying to get a little bit better and a little bit quicker, I just couldn't stand that. So I made my decision to kind of commit myself towards climbing, and I've never once looked back and thought twice about that decision. It just enables me to go to so many exciting and new places and to see so much more of the world in a unique way, that it really is a whole lifestyle that I appreciate.
And and I know that music can do that for people, but it seemed that this kind of outweighed the benefits of where the guitar would take you. So that makes perfect sense. We all have to make decisions. I remember one time in life I loved playing pool, billiards. I loved it. And then I was into basketball, and I realized that basketball just took over, and it led me to, in a lot of ways, led me where I am today. So I don't regret it, but you do kind of have to pick between two things you can be really good at. But dude, that's taken you to some unexpected places. When I first Google your name, the first thing I see is what keeps Austin weird. And I was like, okay, I read he's from Texas. This is probably, Austin, Texas. No, it's you. It's talking about you. And eventually you started climbing, obviously free solo, which I want to get into because that's huge right now with the movie out, free solo. And why the heck you started doing it naked. So get into you get better and better at climbing. What leads you to want to do it without any equipment for that? I mean, that's crazy to most people. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I often joke that I am to climbers as non-climbers are to climbers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, the Keep Austin Weird thing has been a running joke ever since some friends of mine went college shopping in high school, and I get this phone call going, dude, what is your shirt size? Oh, why does it matter? Just answer the question. All right, I'm a medium. And then a couple days later, they show up and they hand me this shirt they found in Austin that said "Keep Austin Weird." I was like, oh, all right, this is officially a thing now. And I tend to keep myself weird, so it's more of a warning label than a call to action in my case. And with the climbing and what have you, so there's a version of climbing called traditional climbing, where, you're usually following a system of cracks in the walls and you place your own hardware for fall protection. So, you've got the rope and you've got hardware and you use it kind of like a video game. If you fall off, you get a do-over, but you're only using your hand strength and your technical movement ability to move your way up the wall. And all that hardware, it's aluminum. It's a metal. It's heavy. And Enchanted Rock, so there's climbing grades for indication of how difficult the route is, and you kind of, it's like any other sport, you start working your way up towards what the harder and harder and more exciting is. And I started off climbing Enchanted Rock, I think, has some of the best 5'10" cracks in the universe. But then from that, it went into these 5'11" climbs that are protected by bolts, and they're kind of like hardware store concrete anchors is what they started off as. They're these little expansion bolts that you can use to plug into concrete, and they'll hold a couple 1,000 pounds of force. And then they evolved to climbing specific bolts. And climbing has sort of just like the rest of the outdoor culture. And at the time that Enchanted Rock was established, they really had that traditional leave no trace or leave minimal trace mindset. So they didn't place very many bolts if they could avoid it, which meant you were looking at very, very long fall potential on these 511s. There was the potential to fall like 60 feet on some of them.
Oh, my word. God.
Yeah. So you, as you're working up the grades, you spend a lot of time just marooned up in outer space, standing on it's what's called slab climbing. It's a little bit less than vertical. And anyone who's ever tried to climb up a slide when they were a kid, and then you find the little notches in the joints between the segments of slide and you push your way up, it's not terribly much different from that kind of, you're insecure and you find a little divot and you work your way up off of that, and then your foot slips off the divot and the adrenaline hits you, and because you realize you're looking at a 60-foot fall rather than just sliding down a slide.
Right.
And really quickly you learn that while there are many places in life where it's perfectly reasonable to freak out, there's none where it's actually productive. And so after I worked my way up the 511s and I was looking at the 512s would basically kill you. Most of the ones that we were looking at, they were horrifically scary. They were such small seams that you couldn't get gear in them. And so you were looking at the potential of hitting the ground if you fell off in a lot of places. So at that point, we scaled back and started climbing the heck out of those 510s because they were good, they were fun, they weren't going to kill us. And
that's helpful.
Yeah, that's a tremendously helpful thing. It's a wonder how that changes the game. And basically the way traditional climbing works is you put protection wherever you want to. So if you're climbing a crack in the wall, you can put protection just about anywhere in that crack. And so it's, somebody hands you this bouquet of anodized colored aluminum and says, here, put these in when you get scared. And, after spending all that time on those insecure 511s, feeling that my foot divots were about to slip, coming back to those cracks where when you stuff your hand inside of a crack, you're really plugged into the mothership. Like, you can just feel this solid connection to the earth that you're climbing. And you're not going to come out. So, your gear starts to space out because you feel more comfortable and you don't get scared. And that's kind of how it works. You put the gear in when you get a bit scared. And one day I only put one piece of gear in on like an 80-foot route. I was halfway up it and a friend of mine goes, hey, are you going to put anything in? I was like, oh, okay. So I sat there fiddling and we weren't very good at climbing. And I tried a piece. It was the wrong size. Tried the next one. It was the wrong size. Tried the next one, it was the wrong size. Aha! This one, finally the correct size. Okay, and I put a clip on it, and then I clipped that into the rope, and then carried on to the top, and I was like, 1, what the heck? 2, it's not even safe anymore. 3, the climbing didn't make me feel taxed at all. The only thing that made me feel taxed was having all this weight hanging off my tail, and having to stop and hang one-handed for so long to figure out which piece of gear to put in, and there's nothing safer than not falling. So if the only thing that made me feel like I was going to fall was all the hassle of making this safety system work, it just wasn't worth it. So I came back down and told my buddy, here, man, hold the video camera. I'm about to do something that is so completely stupid that I'm obviously never going to do it again. Spoiler alert, I was wrong.
Oh my God.
And I took my harness off and I put all the gear on the floor and I went back up this route, and I was expecting it to be like a 4 out of 10 casual, and it turned out to be like a 9 out of 10 casual. It was just so relaxing to be free of all that hassle and all that weight. And the next weekend I came back by myself and I did 32 of my favorite routes in the space of 2 days. And instead of having to wake up at the crack of dawn and climb all the way till night, I was having that Colorado Alpine start. And I was getting 16 climbs a day done. I'd come in at 10 and I'd finish up at 3, and I was done in time for margaritas. And it was just so so much more relaxing of an experience to me that I was like, okay, that's it. This is how it's going to be from now on. And so I've been climbing for 12 years, and that was about 2 years in. So I've been soloing for a full decade now. And in the past 5 years or so, I really made a commitment to it. And I've actually done more climbing without a rope than I have with one, if we're looking at my outdoors record rather than just my training inside.
So like I said before, Peak Refuel is a new company making freeze-dried food. And it's literally the best freeze-dried meals I've ever had. You can use it for backpacking, camping, hunting, whatever you want to use it for. And these folks are the real deal. They spent over 2 years researching the market and creating the perfect recipes, and it is just absolutely awesome. I used the meals on my last guided trip. The people on the trip could not even believe that it was freeze-dried food. Literally, you put a cup of water in. It's like a cup or cup and a half. It's not very much water. And it tastes like it came from a restaurant. That's how good it is. If you're interested in ordering some yourself, you can get 20% off by going to peakrefuel.com and use ASP20 at checkout. I encourage you, go get some, try it for yourself. It's amazing.
This is Colorado nature photographer John Fielder with a great idea for gifting our state this season. Don't get mad at me. My latest Colorado book actually takes the color out of colorful Colorado. Carpets of purple columbine, forests of yellow aspens, and buff-colored herds of elk are rendered in black, white, and gray. You'll be mesmerized by the edges, shapes, and textures of our most beautiful of states. You'll love it. Visit johnfielder.com to see my new book, Colorado Black on White. That's johnfielder.com.
You're obviously climbing a lot of places where there's other people. What are the reactions of the other people climbing there when you start going up the same routes that they are with nothing other than shoes and clothes? Well, sometimes you have clothes on, but what are people's reactions?
There is that one video of me where I did that 350-foot tall route in North Carolina, barefoot, butt naked, and chalkless. And that was just, it was a jackass stunt. But it was definitely a fun one. I thought me and like 10 other people would get a good kick out of it, and it turned out that me and 10 million other people got a kick out of it, and that just went way farther than I expected it would. I've only done a very small handful of routes that way, and it's usually more of a sarcastic thing than a lifestyle.
Right. But I was watching that video of you climbing that wall butt naked, and there's this cinematic like gladiator music playing in the background, and the only commentary was at the end. This guy said, "Well, at least he won't have a farmer's tan."
Yeah. So I gave I kind of surprised my buddy. I gave him a camera and said, "Hey man, you want to see something funny?" All right. I said, "Okay, look across there. You see that route, Dopey Duck?" Yeah. I know that one. I'm about to go rock climb it, and point the camera at me and get like 90 to 120 seconds of footage and just say something like, "This guy's crazy," or whatever. And you've got to you've got to look at it on my YouTube channel. So my Vimeo channel, vimeo.com/free soloist, because the one with the cinematic music is that was syndicated by Cater's News. And on the original, I put this track on it by kind of sarcastically from this artist called Mojo Nixon. And the title of the track was "You Can't Kill Me." So it starts off zoomed in, and you just see me. And just disclaimer out there, this video is PG-13. You don't see anything unfortunate other than me and my hat and my backside. And it starts off zoomed in, and you see this little climber on a wall, and it zooms out, and you see that I'm a few hundred feet off the ground, and all of a sudden you hear this guy start singing, "You can't kill me, I will not die." Right about the point where you think, holy crap, this dude's going to die.
Oh my gosh, man. and all that to say, I'm sure people are enraged with you sometimes.
Yeah, a little bit. That, like I said, I wasn't expecting that one to go so big. And there's the from what I heard from folks, it was 50-50 split between, oh my God, this is the funniest thing I've ever, and oh my God, we've got to slash this guy's tires and keep him away. And I'm pretty sure you can guess which side was more vocal, and I kind of wanted to hide for a little while.
Yeah.
But,
So
typically,
how did that affect you? Did it scare you? Did it say, wow, maybe they have a point?
well, there's certain places where they have a little bit of it's almost like a surfer turf thing, where it's kind of the get off my lawn, stay out of my crag, you're the other, and that just exacerbated it. And I was legitimately a little bit afraid to come out there for a while.
I wouldn't blame you. As tough as we want to be, people's opinions and their reactions do affect us, especially when we're doing something that requires so much focus, like a free solo attempt.
And so, but ordinarily the reactions aren't nearly anything so dramatic. I mean, climbing has a long history of soloing. Climbing, the first record of a technical ascent in the United States was something like 1888, and the piton and the carabiner didn't come over until 1933. So that was 50 years when people were just climbing without ropes to get to the top of technical ascents, and then they just have to climb back down. And so, people know that it's out there. They just didn't know that it was coming here today. And you kind of feel the vibe. The number one rule is don't be a turd to people. And so I try to, as much as I can, I try to keep it to where there's a limited crowd whenever I'm doing my thing. Because you don't want to just ruin someone's day by giving them an anxiety attack. And when I first started climbing down in the southeast without a rope, they don't have much of a heritage of it down there like they do in places like Colorado, where, every day people are going and soloing the flat irons. It's just what they do to get their cardio in before they go to work.
There are lines of people soloing the flat irons.
And, down here, there's nothing comparable to that. There wasn't even a history of someone like, in California, they have the 10-foot tall legendary figure, John Backer, who'd stunned the world with all his free soloing back in the 70s and 80s. And there was no comparable thing to that in the Southeast. So when I first came to Atlanta, it really surprised folks, and there was a bit of a pushback. But about 3 years later, it got to the point where it was just like, oh, it's that guy again. I've heard about him. He does this thing. And then it wasn't such a big deal.
Do your free solos get bigger and bigger with time?
Yeah, so it's just like any other kind of climbing. You go and you train and you get stronger, and then you can do more impressive things. And so my goal is I like being able to climb hard, but I don't like actually climbing hard because it's very difficult, and you spend you've got that rope like a video game, so you get a do-over if you fall off. And if you're climbing at your human limit, then you're going to fall off a lot because you're going to do the move wrong, and then you learn how to do it better, or you're going to get tired, and then you go back home and train, and then you come back, and one day you finally have this glorious moment where the planets align and the moon's above you, and it gives you a little boost upward, and you actually do it without falling. And so, people spend months working on one climb. And to me, climbing is the coolest thing in the world. Second only to perhaps maybe more climbing, obviously. And that's kind of where this thing came from for me is, we used to get like 4 or 5 pitches in a day. And then that first weekend that I went soloing, I got 16.
Just from the not having the cumbersome gear to go with you.
Yeah. And because it's not, people think soloing is this hardcore thing, and I joke that I spend my entire life avoiding anything that seems remotely like a difficult move.
So you're not pushing yourself to your physical extreme when you're soloing. If there's a route that requires that,
even close.
If there's a route that requires that, you're most likely going to have your gear.
Absolutely. So the thing that I say is the send, or the successful ascent, actually happened a few months ago when I was training in the gym. And actually getting on the route and doing it is just a foregone conclusion after all that training. It's not like base jumping. If you're pushing base jumping with the wingsuit, it's this game of like, how close can you get to the object? And that's what's seen as cool. But your safety margin when you're doing base jumping is how far you are away from the object. So to push base jumping, you have to deliberately erode your safety margin. And that's why there are so many tragic consequences of people who are pushing the limits of base jumping, rather than people who just do it recreationally because they like jumping off of things. But for free soloing, it's different, because your safety margin is, I can climb 513, but this route is only 512. So it's very far below your margin. So for me, there's a type of climbing called on-site. It's where you look at a climb and you just climb it on site. You didn't rehearse it. You don't know where the holds are. You don't know how the moves go. You don't know what is the least stressful place to put your protection in. And so it's significantly more difficult than rehearsing a route and then finally getting that one perfect moment, because you have everything refined and you know just the best way to do it. When you're on site, you climb it like a trash can. You either climb it like a trash can or you spend so much time being slow and figuring out the moves that you burn yourself out. So if I can on-site a climb, that means I wasted a lot of extra energy on it, which means if I refine the movement, I'll have a lot of safety margin, because all that energy I burned on the on-site is just energy I can use to deal with the fact that, I'm human like anybody else. So I wake up every morning and I assume that I'm an idiot and plan to be successful despite that fact. So soloing for me is not this statement that I can climb this route perfectly. It's more of a statement that I know I might not climb it perfectly, but I do know that I have enough excess strength and stamina to be able to carry myself safely to the top, even if one or several things go wrong.
That's a really good quote.
Yeah. And so progressing soloing, unlike base jumping, progressing soloing means increasing your strength. And when you increase your strength, that means you can climb harder, which means the definition of easy gets more difficult. And that's all I'm doing, is I'm training really, really hard so that my definition of easy gets really, really ridiculous. And then I just do that all the time.
Has there ever been a moment when you are free soloing a route where maybe a split second of something almost went wrong and you questioned whether you should keep doing it or not? Because that's great, the safety, but then you can't account for maybe a hold giving way, or there was some moisture on the rock you didn't account for. I don't know, just maybe the unexpected once you get up there after all those safety precautions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what the excess strength is for. There's a couple of good examples of this. So one is if I'm on-site soloing. So if I'm on-site soloing, that means it's even easier than my regular solo, so that I can account for the unknown plus the unknown of the moves. And most of these climbs, they don't exist in isolation by themselves. There'll be a climb to the left and a climb to the right. So if I'm on-site soloing, I follow the principle of redundancy. You can climb up, down, left, and right. If I have two of those options available at any point in time, then I'm okay to proceed. But if I feel like, if I make a move and I'm like, if I make this move, I won't be able to reverse it. Well, that cuts me off to one possible option, so I'll pull the cord and bail immediately and climb back down because I don't want to get stuck. On the other hand, if I'm making that move and I'm like, I won't be able to reverse if I do this move. But there's a ledge up here where I can escape to the next route, which is way easier, and I can just climb that if I decide I'm not in for it. So then I go ahead and make the move, and so it kind of breaks down where you only have to commit to it in segments as opposed to having to commit to the whole route. And there was once that I was doing a route that was 5.7. It was quite easy, and there was loose rock everywhere. So I didn't grab any of that. I didn't put my feet on any of that. And I ended up using all the worst holds on the route and skipping the big good ones because they were flexing under my fingers and I thought they would break. And so I put a 5.10 worth of effort into that 5.7 to make sure that I wasn't on anything that would give me a bad time.
Is that about the scariest it's been for you?
That's about the scariest it's been for me. So I've done several hundred pitches solo at this point, and in about my first 75, there's a learning curve. When you're young and stupid, you might not be thinking straight, and I definitely got into positions where on a rope, this climb felt great. And then I got up there and I was just like, holy cow, this does not, like, I don't want to be here. But at that point, I was committed and couldn't back off. And I learned a lot from those. And what really helped me, people in the you mentioned the Free Solo film with Alex Honnold, and it has a lot of hand wringing and soul searching in the climbing world. And I wasn't drawn to, as you've heard from the story here today, I wasn't drawn to soloing because I wanted to emulate some figure. It just occurred logically to me. Like, this is the most obvious thing to do in the universe. And that's kind of how most people come into soloing. And if they don't come into it like that, then about 15 feet up, they realize, holy cow, forget this. Because you've got that visceral animal level instinct for self-preservation, and it's not easy to overcome that when it comes up. And that's kind of a safety valve on it. But so the reason I think it's extremely important to talk about soloing is because whenever I first started off, I was an idiot. But I stumbled across these videos from free soloist Mike Reardon where he talks about his process and how he knows when it's safe and how he knows when it's a bad idea. And that's the important thing. The only safe life is an inherently dangerous sport. The only safety any of us have lies within our ability to make competent decisions. So it's extremely important not only to cover soloing, but instead of hyping up the danger aspect, we need to talk about what it means to make a competent decision with regards to that style of climbing. Because if you just hype the danger, we have all these idiots out there taking Instagram selfies and falling off of a bridge.
Right.
You say danger, and they think cool, and they go to it like, skeeters to a bug zapper.
Man, I don't talk to many people that say skaters instead of mosquito.
I haven't said that word in, holy cow, I haven't said that word in 5 years, I don't think.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Oh, I love it. So you have to constantly fight that, being someone that's in that world, because I didn't realize that. I don't know many free soloists, but I don't realize the calculation. Honestly, it seems exhausting to me to kind of put that much preparation into a climb. That's one reason I just would rather take the ropes and the gear and just be like, I don't want to think about all these little things prior to. I'm just not that much of a planner. But there must be something about that you enjoy, rather than more so than just the danger that people don't see on the face.
The danger I really don't enjoy.
Yeah, but people don't know that all the planning that was put into that climb. They just see you out there, with no clothes on a wall. I'm just kidding.
I like to use a car engine analogy. You've got the tachometer where it shows your RPM, and you've got this green zone where you're okay, and you've got this yellow zone where it's getting hot, and then there's redlining. If you live in the yellow and you screw up, you're going to wind up redlining and you're going to blow your motor and fall off. If you live in the green and you screw up, you wind up in the yellow, so you still have a little bit of margin to reel it in and back off. And the thing that for me that kind of made this transition so logical was all the logistical difficulties of trad climbing. Because you don't always know when your next piece of protection is going to come. The crack might end, and then you've got to go to the next crack. And so you had to constantly make these evaluations, and the thing is, you're putting your own hardware in the wall. So you need to be able to evaluate not only if that hardware can take the impact of your fall force, but you need to be able to evaluate whether the rock around it can take the impact of that fall force. Otherwise, it's just going to rip out and you're hosed. So if you can evaluate rock to take a fall force, then it's a rather trivial matter to evaluate whether that rock can hold just your body weight. And if one of the speaking of risk calculation and all of that, that's one of the most important parts of trad climbing, and it's one of the most difficult things about trad climbing. So I was already steeped quite heavily in that sort of logistic thing, and climbing hard can be extremely stressful, especially when you're above those pieces of gear that you're kind of like, that last piece that I put in, the rock around it wasn't so good, and it's kind of a small piece, and you get very scared. But when I'm soloing, everything I'm doing is extremely sub-maximal. My forearms aren't getting very pumped. The moves aren't very strenuous for me because of the level of training I've put in. And so it becomes a very peaceful thing. It's like yoga. Yoga is this moving meditation where you have these various poses called asanas. And one of the primary tenets of it is to find peace within the severity. And so you're trying to find the most efficient way where you can almost rest in this pose. And that's kind of the way that I view climbing. Every move up the wall is just another asana. And if you're trying to find the most economic movement to climb the wall, then you are finding as much peace as you can in it. And so that's really what it's about for me, is trying to find a way to find peace in these situations where it feels very relaxed and I'm living in that green zone that I mentioned earlier. And it's just about trying to sustain the amount of, or trying to increase not only the amount of time that I can spend in that peaceful state, but also the amount of the various types of terrain where I can stay in that peaceful state. And so it's, like I said, it's that lesson that while there are many places it's perfectly reasonable to freak out, there's none where it's actually productive. And as I spend more time in this practice, and that's what it is, climbing is a practice, soloing is a practice, that ability to flip the switch and enter a state of relaxed, calm focus rather than adrenaline is something that I take away with me into my everyday life. And so that sense of peace that I've come to feel on the wall, the longer I practice this, the more it starts to come off the wall and into my daily life. And that's something which is just extremely satisfying.
Something that's I'm realizing is that you're not living on the edge as much as people would think when they see you out on the wall. You are
no, absolutely
in a
not.
state of peace, in a state of control, and that's more of the rush than the danger of it.
If I have any kind of a rush while I'm climbing, then when I get back down to the ground, I sit and have a long discussion with myself and really contemplate life and ask what horrible decisions made that happen. And to be quite truthful, the most terrifying moments I've ever had in my life all happened on a rope, because you have that sense of confidence and that sense of safety, and you kind of forget a little bit, or you convince yourself to the contrary of that notion that life is an inherently dangerous sport. And, if you've got that rope and you think I'm going to be okay, sometimes you overcommit and you wind up over your head. And with soloing done right, the whole time I'm up there, I've got a smile on my face, and deep down inside, there's nowhere I would rather be than on this wall, experiencing this particular movement.
Now has that? You might not want to get into it, but I know that you have suffered some pretty serious injuries. Is that something you feel like sharing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly important.
Because that was a lot earlier on. But how that has changed, that's probably led you to this state to where you're contemplative of why you're out there. Why am I doing this?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, why don't you just tell us about that?
So, in the space of about 4 different accidents, one of which was, embarrassingly enough, falling off of a cabinet while teaching someone how to belay.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well,
I broke
I'm sorry
both
to hear
of
that.
my wrists in that accident.
Gosh,
yeah,
man.
My scaphoid bone in my wrist cracked right half in 2, and it healed that way.
Oh, my Lanta. Dang.
And so, a few years ago when I got injured in Yosemite and had to go through a battery of tests and x-rays, the wonderful doctor who was assigned my wrist, when she saw the x-ray, she looked like she was going to weep for my lost soul. And according to the doctors, it should turn necrotic and rot within me somewhere about 5 years ago.
Okay. Dang.
But it's still going strong, and I don't have any problems. So that's very fortunate. The body is a wonderful thing, and it's amazing what it can do if not that I'm saying to let your body heal after a wrist injury. I just didn't have insurance and things like that, and I was in a tough situation. But oftentimes things aren't going to be as horrible as you think they are in the moment. And to that notion, the whole litany here, I fractured both ankles, both wrists, 7 vertebrae, my right shoulder, cracked my skull open, had 9 staples in the back of my head. The force of the concussion from Yosemite took out the hearing in my left ear as well as my sense of equilibrium. They tell me that I'm never going to climb again and that I'm going to have trouble walking. Now, that was 3 years ago, and before that, I had kind of like this notion of like a lifetime tick list of the things that, man, it would be awesome if I could do that in my climbing career. And within about a year or two after my accident, my last accident, I had accomplished every single thing on that list. So all the most notable things that you see, when you, I still can't believe it's possible to Google me, but if you Google me or you look on my my social media accounts, all that stuff happened after the accident in Yosemite. And the really remarkable thing about these accidents is that they all occurred with a rope on. So statistically speaking, I probably need to cut that out.
Yeah.
By now, you certainly know who Bent Gate is. That's for a great reason. Bent Gate Mountaineering has been sponsoring the Adventure Sports Podcast almost from the beginning, and we really appreciate that. They've made it possible for all the great shows to continue coming your way. We want to say thanks by reminding you to go to them for your backcountry gear. If you live in Colorado, then just stop by their store in Golden. If not, go to bentgate.com. They have what you need, from the latest ultralight gear to the tried and true classics for climbing, hiking, and camping, like Arc'teryx, Hilleberg, Nemo, Western Mountaineering, and many more. Need advice? They have you covered there too. Their staff are passionate adventurers who can offer help from their own experiences. Bentgate also hosts lots of events and speakers. Check out their website to see the schedule and to see all of their products. Help take care of the Adventure Sports Podcast by getting your gear from Bentgate Mountaineering.
What happened in Yosemite?
Yeah, so I don't exactly remember. Severe head trauma was part of it. Now, I was wearing a brain bucket that I had bought 12 hours before, specifically for the ascent.
Brain bucket, golly.
Me and my partner, Daniel Walden, who is a friggin' great guy. Oh my God. We were going to do the nose on El Capitan, a 4-day big wall. And we had the big bag with our food and sleeping supplies to haul up with us, 3,000 foot tall granite monolith, the same one that the same cliff, but a different route than the one that Alex Honnold just free soloed. And, he did it in 4 hours, and we were planning for 4 days. Kind of just mind-blowing and awesome there.
Unreal.
It's
the nose. It's the mecca of the rock climbing world.
Yeah, it's got this huge heritage to it. It was the first route to be climbed on this stone that was supposed to be impossible. And it just so happens to be that it's the easiest route to do as a big wall climb on the stone. And while it's a very advanced route, there's no such thing as a beginner party on it. It is the most popular route of its style for that reason, the heritage and the ease of access. And so we were drawn to it, of course. And it had been raining constantly. And we were hoping for a 5-day weather window so we could wait for a day for it to dry off, speaking of conditions. And then we would have 4 days in which to time our ascent, because we were pretty sure that we could do it in 3 days, but you don't want to rely on pretty sure when the stakes are getting marooned on a wall and being picked off by a helicopter.
Yeah, plus the bill that you get for that.
And so our plan, unfortunately, we only had a 4-day weather window, so we had to go up on that first day when it was wet. And it was only on the second pitch out of 30 where the accident happened, which is fortunate because it made it very easy for someone to take my carcass off the wall so that Yosar could carry me over to the helicopter. But I remember being like, oh boy, we've got a very safe plan. This is going to work great. And then heading off on the pitch, and then next thing I remember is someone clipping my carcass into their harness and rappelling off the wall with me, and I can't focus my eyeballs any farther than 6 inches in front of my head.
Gosh. So what were you told happened?
We don't know because I don't have perfect memory of it, and the position where my partner was belaying from was around the corner from the climbing that I was doing. But, logically speaking, there are certain conclusions which are inevitable. I planned to put black diamond camelots in the wall as my fall protection, and then I had these things called Omega Pacific Link cams that they're this funny piece of gear that they take a large expansion range, but they don't maybe necessarily have as much holding power, and I was going to plug those in the wall to pull on them to make forward progress. So instead of grabbing onto the wet rock, I was grabbing onto my gear. Figured that would be safer. So the inevitable conclusion is not only did one of those link cams pull out under body weight when I yanked on it, but either I did not place adequate protection to protect a fall, or my fall protection pulled out of the wall. And due to the chaos of the accident, we are unsure which one happened. And so it's like, when you're out driving your car, you get into an accident. It doesn't stop you from driving your car in the future, but you definitely sit down and have a long talk with yourself about how I'm going to change my driving in the future. And that's the big takeaway from these things. And so when I had that accident, I knew that I was going to come back to climbing. So help me God. And the only question was how. And so I just started with the first thing that I had, which was I have no desire to keep peeing in this bottle while I'm laying on a bed. But since I'd lost my equilibrium, everything kept going swimmy on me whenever I tried to sit up. So I'd sit up and then just wait for my equilibrium to stabilize and lay back down and wait for it to stabilize. And you actually have three sources that inform your sense of balance. You have your natural equilibrium, which comes from the inner ear. You have the fact that you've been staring at the world around you for decades and you know how things orient up and down. And tactile response, touching things in the world, informs you about the direction gravity is pulling and how to move your body. So I was able to utilize that. I found that if I just touched something with my hand, that was a bit of tactile feedback, extra tactile feedback, which helped counteract the incorrect signal coming from my inner ear. And so I'd wait until the inner ear went swimmy, and then I'd put a finger on something and wait for it to stabilize and take a couple steps. Then I'd put a finger on the sitting chair in my room, take a couple steps, put a finger on the door hinge, take a couple steps, put a finger on the latch to the door, take a couple steps, open it, go in and take care of business, and hallelujah, I did it. I don't have to deal with the bottle
anymore. You peed in a toilet. Good job.
Yeah. And,
man, that is
after
nuts.
8 days, I called it free solo walking. Falling was definitely not an option because I had 5 broken vertebrae in my neck.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. Dang.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit speechless about that, man. That is daunting, honestly.
Yeah, they weren't fully broken like near the spinal cord. It was the spinal processes where the like your trapezius muscle attached, those little wings on the side of the vertebrae broke, but still. And so the next step was to start getting more mobility, and there was a little piece of trim on the hospital door at about the same height as my ribs. And so I found on that trim going back and forth up the hallway to the hospital that I could just put a finger on it. I didn't need a railing to hold myself up. I just needed something that I could put a finger on and get tactile response. And so I started walking up and down to the soda machine, then back into my room. And this is all before the doctors even managed to get me a walker. So they told me that it would be a long time before I walked again with difficulty. And I would have walked out that hospital door if it wasn't for the fact that they were so insistent on putting me in a wheelchair.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame them, but...
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's just, you start with what can you do as opposed to what can't you do. And you start with that little island, and it might only be a couple square feet of an island that you're standing on. And you find your little piece of trim or whatever it is that gives you something back. And you practice with that until it becomes comfortable. And you took something that was uncomfortable and you made it comfortable. And you've expanded your comfort zone. And that's kind of this one of the lessons that I took from free solo rock climbing and climbing generally. You don't have to solo to take all these lessons back from climbing into your life. It's just that I happen to do that. It's people ask me which is better, soloing or regular climbing, and I'm like, I don't know, which is better, Sudoku or chess? The one that makes you happiest. Nobody has to do any of these things.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I totally agree. You can learn all of life's lessons from climbing. Mine happens to be bike touring. I just fell in love with it, and just the journey of it, and like that's my life within a life, you know?
Yeah, and I'm sitting here and I've read stories about the bike touring and all that, and I listened to your podcast the other day about the fellow that did the first solo circumnavigation human powered of the world, and I'm just listening to all these things and thinking about even like the Appalachian Trail or the bike touring that you're doing. I'm just like, holy cow, that is so hardcore. Like I don't have the constitution to handle something like that. Like I might could do it, but I just don't have the constitution to do that and then have a tremendous amount of fun with it. So that's super impressive to me.
Yeah, and honestly, I look at what you guys do, because I'm not an avid climber, and it's so different to me than what like my thing, which is like a journey. It's months of being within a journey. And I look at what you do and think, man, that is just totally different to me. And I don't think I'm capable of it, you know? And it's crazy. I look at you guys as completely hardcore, and I'm the one that's just kind of moseying around on my bike.
And I'm just the one moseying around on the wall trying to avoid anything difficult.
Right. Trying to avoid anything. That is really good. That is awesome. And dude, I'll be honest, you're the first free soloist I've ever really got to talk to, and it's making a lot more sense to me now why, like, the justification for people who have no idea what it's about, what it's like, the danger of it.
It comes down to the capacity of the human mind. And one of the most powerful capacities of the human mind is that it can grow accustomed to anything. You know, it's just, how'd it feel the first time you drove your car on the freeway when you were a kid?
Scary as hell.
Yeah, now it's just Tuesday.
Yeah, now I fall asleep. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's you're right.
You have something that's uncomfortable, and then it becomes comfortable, which enables you to that next step. And then we have people doing NASCAR races and Formula One and things like that. And it all started with being afraid on the freeway when they were 16, probably. And then that same capacity is, it allows men to go on the moon, but it's a double-edged sword. It allows us to get used to bad lives and bad situations and just keep grinding it out because it's so familiar and you're used to it. But then on the other hand, that's what allowed me to recover in the hospital. Is I had this notion that I've gathered from climbing, and for me particularly from soloing, but I mean perhaps it's probably something that you've learned from bike touring, is that you start with what you've got and you have something that's a little bit uncomfortable. And what is discomfort? It's the feeling of being unfamiliar with a situation. And as you spend more time and marinate in that situation, you grow comfortable with it, and that expands your comfort zone, maybe only 1 square foot. But if you get a square foot every day, then by the end of the year, you've got acres of new terrain in which you can feel comfortable and confident. So I'm able to apply that to my climbing, and then I was able to apply that to these situations in which I got injured, which enabled me to come back and heal much better than the doctors had anticipated.
How daunting did that feel to you? What was your mindset? Was it always, I'm going to get better, I'm going to do this, or was it, oh no, I'll never do what I love again? Because that can crush a soul,
Oh yeah. So there have been 2 accidents which I would call catastrophic. One of them was years before that, where an individual let go of my rope and dropped me 35 feet. I fractured the T11 and 12 vertebrae, compression fractures, and spent 4 months in a back brace. So with the Yosemite debacle, on that one, it was kind of easy to stay chipper because you kind of think, everybody has to pay their dues to the universe. At least once something terrible is going to happen.
Right.
And then you get through it and, keep going. And so with the Yosemite thing, it was just, oh my God, not again.
Oh, I believe it, man.
And it was, at first it was, I can't do this. I can't see. I spent 2 days in the ICU where I couldn't focus my eyeballs more than 6 inches in front of my face. And it took me a while to go to sleep at night because every time I closed my eyeballs, so we got those 3 sources of input, right? Visual, tactile, and then the inner ear. And when I closed my eyeballs, now it was a direct competition between the false sensor of the inner ear and the tactile response underneath my tailbone. And so the result was every time I closed my eyes and laid down to go to sleep, it felt like I got tossed into a Home Depot paint shaker.
Jeez.
And so I had to retrain my cerebellum to accept that I was laying down stationary. So I'd wait for it to go swimmy, then I'd open my eyes and it would stabilize. Then I'd close them and it would go swimmy, and then I'd open them and it would stabilize until finally it stayed stable when I closed my eyes. And then over the space of a couple days, my vision started to return. And at that point, I started thinking, okay, what next? So here's what I can do. My seeing's coming back. My balance is coming back. Let's start there and move forward. And it really helped that this doctor came in and said, you're never going to climb again, because then I'm like, oh yeah, you want to bet? Challenge accepted. And so once I realized that things were improving, well, once it begins to improving, you can just start pushing that momentum forward. It's like, we all went through physics as kids. You've got static friction, and then you've got dynamic friction when things, I think it's called dynamic friction. But the friction of when things are moving. So once it got moving, that friction and that inertia wasn't so difficult to overcome, and it was easy to just kind of push it a little bit more. Now it's moving faster. Push it a little bit more, and now it's moving faster. And take that little square foot of comfort zone that I had established by being able to close my eyes and go to sleep, and take that and expand it a little more. Now I'm sitting up. Expand it a little more. Now I can swing my legs over the bed. Expand it a little more. Now I can stand up. Expand it a little more. Now I don't have to deal with this infernal pee bottle anymore. And then expand it a little more. And I'm walking back and forth to the soda machine. And now I'm like, okay, we can really do this now. And 28 days after the accident, I was back on the climbing wall at my local gym. I was on a 5.6, and it was plastic, and I was terrified, but Bob dang it, I was doing it. And fascinating thing, as far as rehabilitation for balance issues, turns out climbing is a wonderful one for it because of that tactile response. Now, instead of just having one foot and the other foot, you've got 2 feet and 2 hands that are in contact with feeling gravity, and you're spinning your head around looking for things. So now you've got 4 pieces of tactile response plus your visual response overriding that sense of vertigo, and it allowed me to reprogram and repattern much faster. And so I think it was about a year after the accident, I was actually climbing harder than I was beforehand. It's amazing what you can do with the proper combination of pissed off and stubborn. Either one by itself can really be a problem, but the two together in just the right proportion, you can really focus that.
It might not be healthy all the time, but I tell you what, it's an excellent motivator when you are pissed off.
And stubborn too. The stubbornness kind of helps you when you get a setback and you're like, Argh.
Yeah, man, I remember my first bike trip. I heard I didn't know what I was doing, and I was planning for it, and I went and talked to this quote-unquote expert, and he was like, you can't do this, and with the time frame, and I was like, from that, I was kind of questioning. I was like, yeah, I want to do this. After that, it was like, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to walk in here when I'm done, and I'm going to tell you how awesome it was. and I'm just going to rub it in your face. And it was
Yeah.
a great
And it's
motivator
like,
on those really hard days.
yeah, and speaking of that 7-hour drive down to the Red and back, I've been getting familiar with your podcast and what have you, and listening to hours of it. And there was, from lawyer to mountaineer, she said, I'm going to go to Everest Base Camp. That's a doable thing. Well, now she's got her comfort zone and time frame, schmime frame. I've got this. What's the next logical step from there? Okay, what's the next logical step from there? And, once you're comfortable with something, don't ascribe to yourself some particular, you got to avoid the S word. Should, supposed to be. What matters is where you feel comfortable and where your skills can take you. And start with that. What do you have? Okay, what next step can you take? And as long as you keep taking a next step, that's the thing. I've been soloing for a decade. To get to where I am, it was just one little step after another. And, moving up to Chicago, I've met a whole lot of people, and, it's, hey, what'd you do? How do you climb? And in climbing, they have this brave and humble attitude where you're supposed to be, not talk about what you do and kind of be humble. And you're, especially if you're soloing, because if you talk about your soloing, clearly you're doing it for the wrong reasons. But where I come from, if somebody asks you a direct question, you give them a direct answer. And so people ask me, what do you do? What do you climb? And I'd tell them, they'd say, that's ridiculous. And I'm like, well, it's not ridiculous because I did this beforehand. Well, that's ridiculous too. That's not ridiculous because I did this beforehand. And after 30 minutes, we've gone backwards. And while a lot of it seems ridiculous in hindsight, when I think of the whole picture, at each step, it was just one little small step forward over a decade. And there's this great quote from Dave McLeod, who's one of the foremost trad climbers in the world. In his book, 9 out of 10 climbers make the same mistakes, which is a great self-coaching book. He says that the difference between the pros and the rest of us is only 4%. And I know what you're thinking right now. 4% is not the difference between me and you and the best climbers in the world. But what he says is it's 4% every day. You come in and they try 4% harder. They dig 4% deeper. They wait 4% longer to try and think about what they're doing in the middle of an on-site climb. And that enables them to see the sequence and succeed. And when you take that 4% every single day, compound interest is a heck of a thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was literally discussing it with a friend this morning. That exact
That's
topic.
awesome.
Yeah, it's hilarious you say that right before our interview. That's so funny. But yeah, so that compiled little bit extra is what makes the difference over the course of years from people that were, okay to those that are noteworthy.
Yeah. And so for me, I have people ask me about training for climbing, and I tell them that there is no point in training for climbing, except if we go back to that premise that climbing is the coolest thing in the universe. And the only thing better than that is more climbing. So if you look at something and say, that's too hard for me, well, that's less climbing. But there's the point of diminishing returns. Speaking of economics and compound interest, it seems like to me the majority of the climbs in the universe are 5'11" and under. So if you can climb 5'11", you're having a pretty good time.
You're going to be busy for a while.
Right. But the problem comes when you go on vacation. Because now you're doing everything on site. You can't rehearse it because you've never been there before. And so really, if you can on-site 5'11" in your chosen style, well, now the world is your burrito. You can run around and have a good time anywhere. And fortunately or unfortunately for me, depending on how you view it, my chosen style was free solo rock climbing. So that notion led me to train a lot for a long time, for many years, getting that 4% every time I went in. And it led to the point where I was able to on-site 5'11". And at that point, some 5 years ago, that's when I realized that, oh, holy cow, I am free soloing laps on routes that some of my climbing partners can't even climb. And that was probably the first time that, I've got a little bit of imposter syndrome. People, if someone tells me that I'm a good climber, I'm just like, no. There's so many people better than me.
Right. Yeah. I'm better than millions of people, but there's these few
Yeah,
guys that are better, so I'm a nobody. No, I totally get
yeah.
it.
And it's like, I'm not sponsored or anything like that. I'm just some random idiot, you know? But at that point where I realized I was soloing climbs that my friends couldn't do, I was like, oh, maybe I've got some kind of special gift here that would be a shame to ignore. And so I was like, well, you know what? I don't know where I'm going to go with this. I don't have a specific goal per se, because if you have a really firm goal, then you start wanting it, and that can be dangerous with this sort of thing. But I was like, you know what? Let's just train and get really strong and see what logically comes after that. And that's kind of where I'm at. And, you know, like I mentioned earlier, everything I had ever dreamed of doing in a lifetime of climbing has already happened. So I'm kind of at this state of Zen where I don't really have any super firm goals or anything that I'm really grasping for. But I actually I'm just training to get real strong and seeing where it goes. And where it's gone is to some pretty exciting places. Like I'm one of the very few people on Earth who has on-site free soloed 512. It was 12A, you know, an easy 12, but still, the statistics on this are hard to find. But it's definitely under 100, and it might be under 10 people. I'm not entirely sure. If somebody knows, please tell me, because I'm super curious about that statistic, like kind of just what it means, if anything.
Right. Wow. Yeah. So you kind of just alluded to it. So in your future is basically the desire to maybe pursue more achievements like that.
You know, every day in the climbing gym, I see people that they're bouldering really hard, and I'm sitting here making a project out of their warm-up.
Right.
I just have this, there's a great quote from Tom Randall. He says he was trained real hard and became one of the best off-width climbers in the world. And he said, if you want to be the best at your game, it helps to pick a game that no one else is playing. And so, nobody wants to go climb stuff without a rope, because for most people, it's understandably horrifying. But I kind of have this odd predisposition to it that just made it come naturally to me. And so being one of the few people who does it, and being that I've put that 4% in for a decade, and I made that decision to commit to it 5 years ago. You know, when you first start soloing, nobody's happy about it. All they want to do is tell you that you're an idiot. And so there's this notion that people are just doing it for the attention or for narcissism. And I'm like, man, if you're doing it for that, you're not going to last long, because the attention is outrageously harsh. And that, for years, that made me very hesitant of calling myself a free soloist, or really admitting that this was my primary focus. And it took that moment where I had achieved my goal of on-site soloing 511 to really admit that I was going to pursue this thing.
Moving forward, you're just going to keep developing your skills, and you're going to see where it takes you. I like that
just
approach.
Keep on keeping on. Yeah. And so this season, I had soloed 8 512s prior to this season, and up to 512C for those of you who know the particulars of the grade system. And I had this notion that going higher than that was something that I didn't want to push into yet, that I didn't have the strength available to make that a goal. So what I decided was to make this a season of learning. So I'm practicing on easy 12s instead of hard ones to build up my base level of experience with that difficulty of movement. And so I've done 4 more 512s this season, and weather permitting, I might get a couple more, although it's been a somewhat short season this year. Fall came late, winter's coming a bit early. And next season, I kind of have this cute goal of doing a dozen 512s, like a dozen. And it looks like I should have that goal by either late this season or early next season, because now I'm up to 11 512s in total. And I like to repeat them. That's another thing, is I like to repeat them afterward. There's this great quote from Mike Reardon says, any idiot can get lucky once. The second time is the solo. So the notion there is that if you aren't at least willing to come back and repeat it, you got away with it. And you can only get away with so much in one lifetime before it comes back to bite you.
Yeah, that's scary.
So all in all, while I've done only 11 routes of 512, I've done a total of about 25 laps at the grade, which is really helping build my confidence and my my sense of peace in that grade, because it was a heck of a thing. Not many people solo 512, especially not on the regular. And at my first 512, again, it was that imposter syndrome. Like, sure, it was the next logical step, but it was this huge burden of the unknown. Like, I'm not some sponsored climber. I'm not one of those guys you hear about. I'm not in the media or anything like that. I'm just some turd that did a naked solo and went viral on clickbait websites. And like, what right do I have to do this thing? And I was standing at the base of the route, just overcome with all these doubts. But I have this process, and I talk about a pre-flight checklist. And so I'll climb routes in my worst pair of shoes and leave them untied with no chalk whatsoever. And I'll do it for my warm up when I'm not fresh and things like that. And I'll put weights on my harness. Sometimes I've done that to make sure that even if I'm deliberately making it harder on myself, it still feels like a good idea. And it's this sort of I jokingly call it a pre-flight checklist. And I walked up to the wall just saying, logically, this anxiety is, it's illogical, because I have my pre-flight checklist and I have this method and all of these things. And when I pulled onto the wall, all that anxiety disappeared. The holds felt like old friends. I knew my physical ability was up to the task, and it was just a pure Zen flow state from there all the way to the top.
That's what's going to keep you doing this sport for many more years. That level of understanding, the self-awareness, the experience, and knowing that it's a journey and not taking it too quickly. I heard advice from a guy one time that said, it was really intense, kind of corny too. He said, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space. And I was like,
wow,
dang. Well, I'm not living on the edge, not every moment, but I'm like, this guy, it was kind of dramatic, and I didn't love it.
Yeah. And it goes back to that notion of, I'm not really striving to push forward. I'm just trying to expand my comfort zone of what feels easy, and I don't have concrete goals. I'm just that's what it was. That was the thought that I had in my head. It took me a second to circle back and get it, because that quote was kind of stunning, but it goes back to that decision point where with guitar, I enjoyed the end goal, but with climbing, I enjoyed the process. So the process of becoming a better soloist is much more satisfying to me, or equally as satisfying to me as the end result. So I don't have this huge craving to tick high numbers just to put another notch in my belt and satisfy my ego. It's the process and everything that I enjoy too. And I some of my friends joke that I'm a bit of an evangelistic climber, and my religion is training. And it all goes back to, my dad was a bodybuilder back when I was a kid. He was into kickboxing and stuff like that and training. And one thing he taught me from a young age was that muscle soreness, it's not just pain, but it's the feeling of being stronger tomorrow. And that, I think that's one of the things that's really enabled me to enjoy the process of training, because when I'm in there grinding it out, climbing these plastic problems, and, some of the things that I do for training are just heinously boring. But in the back of my head, I've got that inclination that this isn't just pain and drudgery. It's the feeling of being stronger tomorrow. So, I joke in a lot of ways that I seem to have mistaken training for fun.
Well, more power to you then. That's going to give you an advantage over time with the people that despise it.
Right, yeah. Like I started out by falling off of a upper beginner route. That was my beginning. So I don't have any particular talent other than the talent of masochism and being able to grind it out and enjoy it.
How can people follow you? How can they keep up with your crazy adventures?
Yeah, so I realize that, as mentioned before, nobody is going to remember my name, but they will remember that I'm an idiot. So I've kind of taken the username Free Soloist on as many platforms as I can. So we've got facebook.com/Free Soloist, Instagram.com/Free Soloist, Vimeo.com/Free Soloist, and freesoloist.com was taken. So I've got thefreesoloist.com, which I made because a buddy of mine, we were having that conversation of what have you done and where have you been, and that's ridiculous. And he got all stoked to make a miniature little documentary about me, which you can keep up with the progress on that on the website, and it should be out sometime this winter. And because that guy, he enjoys working a camera and editing film as much as I enjoy climbing. It's really a pleasure to watch his stoke.
Good, yeah. I have edited some film. It's drudgery to me, but I'm glad there are people out there that enjoy it. And dude, once it comes out, we will share it on all our social media. We'd love to help promote it once you have a movie coming out.
Man, thanks a lot for that. That's cool to hear. It's it's all about sharing stoke with people and trying to build that good mojo. And while I might be different than other climbers in some ways, we all have the same universal path: goal, train, fail, succeed.
Yes. Well, thanks for joining us, and keep getting people stoked about what you're doing.
Likewise. It's been a pleasure to join you on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you know somebody that would make a good guest on the show, or if you have a pretty cool story about the outdoors or adventure sports that you want to tell us, please call us and leave a voicemail at 812-MAIL-POD. That is 812-624-5763. You can also send us an email at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. Again, it is always helpful to leave us a review on iTunes. And if you'd like to be a supporter of the show, you can give $5 a month at patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. And links for all that stuff is also in the show notes. So thanks again for listening. And y'all get out there and do something so you can be on the show one day. All right, later. Don't forget, if you want to save 20% off the best backpacking food you're ever going to eat, go to peakrefuel.com and use ASP20 at checkout.